You were not born weak. You have been trained to appear harmless, trained to enter a room and ask permission with his eyes, trained to smile when they pass you, trained to confuse silence with peace. And while you learn to be correct, another learns to be decisive. While you collect merit, someone else collects levers. While you try to be loved, another learns to be needed. Machiavelli observes this without mercy and without anger. He just watches. And that's why it's scary, because it doesn't offer you comfort, it offers you lucidity. Imagine the Florentine as a shadow behind your shoulder, not to guide you by morals, but to guide you by map. He doesn't ask you what it should be. He asks you what it is. Because power does not reside in speech. Power lives in instinct. Power does not reward intention. Advantage reward. And advantage is an invisible architecture made of fear, vanity, and self-interest. You might hate that phrase. You can resist. But resistance does not change the mechanism. It just makes you more vulnerable to him. Have you ever felt it? You enter a room and it feels like there is a filter in the air. A subtle field that separates players from pieces. Some say little and the room doubles. Others talk too much and the room swallows them up. Some don't ask and receive. Others ask politely and are punished with indifference. And then you ask yourself, what's wrong with me? Machiavelli would respond, without emotion, you are asking the wrong question. It's not about being wrong. It's about being too readable. It's about surrendering your center, your hunger, your need for approval. Because when the world realizes what you need, it figures out where to pull you. The biggest lie you've been told about connection is that it comes from sincerity and good intentions. This works in intimate relationships when there is reciprocity. But power is not intimate, it is structural. Power is theater, and theater does not reward authenticity, it rewards control of perception. Machiavelli saw this before any modern psychologist named it. He understood man as an animal that disguises itself as virtue to protect interests. He understood that morality, in public life, is often a sophisticated mask of fear. And if you talk with the mask on, you lose. You need to talk to the shadow. Perhaps you have tried to approach influential people as if you were offering friendship. You offered kindness, loyalty, competence. And he felt that none of this opened any doors. It seems unfair, but it's not personal. Powerful people are rarely looking for more affection. They are looking for security, extension, advantage. And here begins the cutting point. If you enter as someone who wants to be seen, you become a candidate to be used. If you come in as someone who sees, you become a risk. And every risk is assessed. Every risk is tested. Every risk is shaped. Machiavelli doesn't tell you to hate that. He tells you to stop pretending it doesn't exist. Observe the cold logic. Whoever decides has no time to save. Whoever decides doesn't need any more stories. Those who decide do not live in a lack of opportunity, they live in a lack of trust. So the real question is, what makes you trustworthy to an instability predator? What makes you useful to someone surrounded by flattery and threats? What makes you discreet for someone who knows that every smile can be a knife? Do you notice how innocence, in this scenario, is a smell? And how does the smell attract? Machiavelli walks through these questions like a surgeon. He shows you that people are not driven by what they say, but by what they fear losing. Status, control, image, advantage. Therefore, when you try to impress someone above you, you don't gain respect. You turn on the identity alarm. The powerful build their aura on the idea of being the axis. If you shine without permission, you look like a usurper. And the ego, when it feels threatened, reacts like an empire under siege. He doesn't destroy you because you made a mistake. He destroys you because you could win. And here is the first internal turn that Machiavelli demands: abandon the lack of recognition. This is not coldness, it's protection. As long as you need to be validated, you don't negotiate, you beg. Beggars don't choose terms, they accept crumbs. Beggar reveals intention too soon. Beggar tries to convince. Beggar explains himself too much. And anyone who explains themselves too much is giving away their own weak point, the need for acceptance. You think the world judges your kindness. In practice, the world measures your positioning. Notice the symbol, the open hand. She asks. She begs. She exposes that it is empty. And power has an animal perception of emptiness. When you come in with an open hand, the answer is almost always a test. A delay. A silence. A vague promise. Because power wants to see how much you can handle without falling apart. It wants to see if you insist, if you humble yourself, if you adapt, if you become a satellite. And if you become a satellite, that's it, you've been classified as a piece. The piece moves, but does not decide. What Machiavelli suggests is not cruelty. It's mental hygiene. A method to avoid being devoured by invisible games. It teaches you to breathe before reacting, looking before speaking, understanding that each environment has a specific hunger. There are environments hungry for vanity, others for loyalty, others for secrecy, others for calm. And when you come in offering what you want to give, and not what the environment values, you become noise. Noise is not attacked by hate, is ignored by economics. Ignoring is cheaper. Maybe this hurts because pain reveals an old belief, the idea that merit should be enough. Machiavelli looks at you and asks you, without raising his voice, since when was the world built to reward justice? This question is not to depress you. It's to free you from a childish pact with reality. While you demand a fair world, you hand over the steering wheel to those who accept the world as it is. And whoever accepts the world as it is, learns to drive. Do you want to understand the psychological essence of this? It's simple and terrible. Human beings seek to reduce risk and increase benefit. This manifests as self-interest. And when self-interest meets fear, manipulation is born. When vanity is encountered, theater is born. When you encounter insecurity, control is born. Powerful people are not gods. These are people who learned early to read these signals and to move based on them. They learned not to ask to exist. They learned to take up space. They learned to seem inevitable. And deep down, they hope to find someone who is neither a worshiper nor an enemy. Someone who understands the game. This is where Machiavelli becomes a central presence. He is not teaching you to be a villain. He is teaching you to stop being predictable prey. The predator doesn't choose you because you are weak. He chooses you because you are transparent. Because he can predict your next move. You will seek approval. You will try to prove your value. You will offer too much. You will always be available. This predictability is a leash. So I ask you a question that cuts through the fog. Do you want to be seen, or do you want to have decision-making power? Do you want to be loved, or do you want to be untouchable? Do you want to be understood, or do you want to be impossible to replace? You can't have everything at the same time. Machiavelli demands an internal choice. Either you live as a virtuous player, or you learn to be a lucid player. And a lucid player is not someone who destroys people. It is someone who sees the mechanism before the mechanism destroys him. In the next steps, you will get into the heart of the laws. Not as a list, but as keys. Each of them is a hidden blade in language. Each one is a mirror that reveals what people hide even from themselves. And when you start to apply it, something first changes inside. Your mental posture stops begging and starts evaluating. You stop chasing and start attracting. Not for empty charisma, but for stability. And stability is rare. Stability is magnetic. Stability is a threat to those who live by shaking you. But I need to warn you before you go any further, the first door doesn't open with force. It opens with silence and precision. And the most common mistake happens exactly in the first contact, in that second when your ego wants to shine, to be remembered. If you repeat this mistake, you won't be remembered. You will be marked. And whoever is marked does not enter the circle. It becomes a usable material. Are you ready to hear the rule that decides, in seconds, whether you are welcomed as an ally or discarded as a pawn? Because the first law is not about conquering. It's about not provoking the instinct to destroy other people's ego. And when Machiavelli whispers this law, you understand why so many talented people are stuck outside, knocking on the door with their own bleeding hands. Have you ever walked away from a conversation with someone powerful feeling like you had somehow missed something you couldn't explain? As if he had said too much, shown too much, exposed himself too much, and only later, in the silence of the way back, he realized that the door not only didn't open, it closed carefully. Machiavelli would say that there, in that invisible instant, you overshadowed the master without realizing it. Not with overt arrogance, but with that nervous glow of someone who wants to prove their worth. You told your story, showed your numbers, let your effort slip away. He thought he was building respect. What he built was a threat. Because whoever occupies the center of the room lives to support their own image. And the image, when it feels eclipsed, calls on the defense instinct. Imagine the scene: a simple meeting, an oval table, coffee getting cold. You prepare as if it were a lifetime performance. Open your mouth and pour out your competence. While you speak, the other person does not listen to your merits. He hears his own ego being pressured. Not because you are better, but because you didn't realize that, in that environment, the value is not in shining, but in reflecting. Machiavelli whispers that power cannot bear witnesses to its own vulnerability. Therefore, when you come in trying to impress, you are not seen as an ally. You are seen as a risk variable. The curious thing is that this happens in the most commonplace places. In an office, in a conversation with the boss, in an informal meeting. You arrive excited, tell us what you discovered, how you solved something complex, how you came up with a brilliant idea. Expect recognition. Receive silence. Or a let's see later. And you wonder why that person, so polite, remained distant. Distancing is not personal. It's structural. Machiavelli calls this the economy of the ego. The more you push your own light, the more you force others to defend their own shadow. The second trap comes soon after. After not being recognized, you try to compensate by being more open, more sincere, more transparent. Tell us your plans, your goals, your dreams. Talk about what you want to achieve, what you hope for, what you need. You think it creates connection. What it creates is predictability. And predictability is the subtlest form of control. When someone knows what you want, they know how to delay, how to promise, how to pull your leash. Machiavelli saw in this the fundamental weakness of the modern human being, wearing desires on their faces and calling them authenticity. Think about how many times you have entered a room with your eyes saying it all. That glow of expectation, that anxiety hidden behind politeness. The person in front of you doesn't need to be cruel to notice. The body denounces. The tone of voice gives it away. The way of waiting for a response betrays. And when power smells hunger, it doesn't need to attack. Just leave you hanging. An email that takes time. A vague answer. I'll let you know. Uncertainty eats away at you more than a refusal. You're stuck waiting for crumbs of attention, while the other person, now at an advantage, watches your reaction like someone testing a mechanism. Machiavelli teaches you how to turn this table around with an art that seems invisible, hiding intentions. Not in the sense of lying, but in the sense of not revealing yourself before understanding the lay of the land. Arrive and talk about everything except what you want. Talk about neutral themes, broad interests, ideas that humanize, but don't deliver. Creating a void where the other tries to project meaning. The mystery is not theatrical, it's psychological. When someone can't read you, they start thinking about you. Start asking inside why you are there, what you want, what your role is. And in this subtle moment, the dynamic is reversed. You are no longer looking for space in their mind, you are already occupying it. There is an everyday scene that illustrates this with brutal clarity. Two people ask the same manager for something. The first writes a long text, explains the context, justifies the request, almost apologizes for existing. The second sends a short, almost neutral message, talking about a side issue, something that interests the manager. Days later, the manager responds to the second carefully. Not because she is better, but because she didn't show her hunger. Machiavelli would say that a well-placed silence is worth more than a well-written plea. And then comes the third twist, the one that definitively separates the beggar from the strategist. You were taught to appeal to kindness, telling stories of overcoming, talking about difficulties, asking for understanding. This works with friends, family, people who love you. But power does not move out of mercy. Mercy weighs. Mercy consumes time. Mercy creates obligation. And people at the top are bombarded with requests all the time. If they served everyone who deserved it, they would be exhausted and poor. Machiavelli doesn't tell you to be cruel. He tells you to be useful. He teaches you to translate need into someone else's advantage. Instead of saying I need it, you learn to say this solves your problem. Instead of help me, you turn to it saves you time. The scene changes completely. You are no longer someone asking for space. You are someone offering relief. And relief is the most valuable currency for those carrying heavy decisions. Imagine that someone powerful is always fighting an invisible bottleneck. A team that doesn't work, a project that gets stuck, a competitor that advances. You watch in silence. Join fragments. One day, in a casual conversation, you say, I noticed that this particular point always blocks the flow. I have a simple solution that cuts this problem in half. You don't ask for anything. You hand over a key. At that moment, Machiavelli smiles inside. Because you just changed your position on the board. You stopped being someone who wants something and became someone who has something. And maybe you feel scared when you read this. Fear of appearing cold, calculating. But look at the real world. How many kind people have you seen ignored? How many competent people have you seen stagnate? Morality does not protect. What protects is positioning. Machiavelli is not asking you to abandon your humanity. He's asking you to stop putting her at risk. There is an internal turning point that happens when you start to apply this. You walk into a room and, for once, you don't try to sell yourself. You listen. Observe the rhythm, the pauses, the silences. Talks little. Does not reveal plans. It doesn't ask for anything. You go out and you feel something strange. You don't feel empty. You feel whole. And this completeness changes the way people look at you. They don't know how to explain it, but they realize that you are not there to be saved. You are there to read the game. And it is at this point that Machiavelli prepares you for something even deeper. Because until now you have learned not to obfuscate, to hide intentions, to speak with self-interest. But this is still the surface. It's still what you do when you're present. The next layer is not about what you say. It's about what happens when you disappear. Because, deep down, power does not reveal itself in presence. He reveals himself in absence. And when you understand this, you discover why so many people who seem essential disappear overnight, while others, silent, become impossible to ignore. You start to notice something strange when you change your most basic behavior. Instead of responding immediately, you wait. Instead of explaining yourself, you observe. Instead of taking up every silence, you allow the emptiness to breathe. And it is in this almost imperceptible interval that Machiavelli reappears as a silent presence, reminding us that scarcity is not the absence of value, it is the frame that creates it. Most people live too available, like doors always open on a noisy street. When everything is exposed, nothing is desired. Power, on the contrary, grows in what is not easily achieved. You test this on something banal. An invitation that before you would accept immediately, you now respond calmly. Not with contempt, but with density. A let's align another time instead of a of course, whenever you want. And the world doesn't collapse. On the contrary, it reorganizes itself around its new rhythm. Machiavelli would call this a symbolic repositioning. You stop orbiting and start having your own orbit. The other person begins to measure you not by what you offer, but by what he doesn't have immediate access to. And then you notice the most disturbing change: your absence begins to speak for you. It's not a childish disappearing game. It's a strategic retreat that creates resonance. When you don't show up, you don't disappear, you echo. The other wonders where you are, what you do, who you talk to. Not because you asked for attention, but because you left a blank space in their narrative. Machiavelli knew that human beings do not tolerate gaps in meaning. He fills the void with imagination. And imagination is always more powerful than presence. Have you ever realized how, in your life, those who were always available were rarely remembered as valuable? After mastering silence, you realize that speech also needs surgery. Most people talk to show off. Talk about yourself, your achievements, your pain. He speaks like someone throwing coins to buy relevance. Machiavelli proposes the opposite: you speak to reflect. You become a mirror. It does not repeat the other like a parrot, but gives it back a refined version of itself. If he's fast, you adjust the pace. If he thinks in terms of battle, you adopt the language of war. If he sees the world as a market, you start talking about value and exchange. His brain doesn't analyze you, he recognizes you. This isn't social trickery, it's emotional engineering. The human nervous system trusts what feels familiar. When you synchronize posture, vocabulary, response time, you create an invisible bridge that bypasses critical thinking. The person feels like you understand them, even if you can't explain how. Machiavelli didn't talk about mirror neurons, but he saw the effect power likes those who confirm their own image without idolatry. It is a clean reflex, without submission. And there is a subtlety that few realize: the mirror is not to flatter, it is to stabilize. You don't praise the ego, you organize the other's internal chaos. He leaves the conversation clearer than he entered it. More aligned, more centered. And when someone powerful experiences this, they come to associate you with the very feeling of order. You become a reference for balance amidst the noise. When was the last time someone left a conversation with you feeling more clear-headed than before? The next step seems dangerous because it involves secrecy. Machiavelli understood that information is not accumulation, it is curation. You don't make yourself useful by telling gossip. You become indispensable by filtering what really matters. It is the rumor that anticipates a change, the detail that reveals a systemic failure, the discreet movement that announces a deviation from the route. You begin to see the world as a field of weak signals, not obvious headlines. This changes the way you listen. You don't listen to respond, you listen to map. Conversations become sensors. Small comments become clues. And when you deliver something, you don't deliver everything. It delivers enough to generate impact, but not enough to lose control of the source. Machiavelli does not romanticize this. He warns: if the other person can obtain the same information without you, you become dispensable. Power does not preserve redundancies. And then something new happens. People begin to see you not as a social presence, but as an invisible infrastructure. You are the one who brings the missing vision, the angle that no one noticed, the warning that avoids a costly mistake. You don't enter the scene with spotlights. You come in as an antidote. And antidotes don't make noise, but they save entire systems. Have you ever stopped to think why, behind the scenes of any important decision, there is always someone who never appears in the photos? At this point in the journey, you understand that Machiavelli did not transform you into someone distant, but into someone dense. His presence begins to carry layers. You are not just the nice person, nor the competent one, nor the trustworthy one. You are the point where absence creates value, mirroring creates trust, and information creates silent dependency. This is scary because it is not visible. There are no applause, there are no trophies. There's just a slow change in the way doors start to open without you asking. And there's an almost mystical side effect: you stop feeling rushed. When you know that the void works for you, that the reflection protects you, and that information anchors you, time stops being the enemy. The game is now read in long movements, not in short impulses. Machiavelli would be satisfied you stopped reacting and started orchestrating. But there is still a layer you haven't touched, the most dangerous of all. Because until now you have learned to be scarce, to be a mirror, and to be a source. We need to learn how to be a connection. It remains to be understood how two forces can be united by something you control. It remains to be discovered why a common enemy creates alliances that are deeper than years of coexistence. And when you understand this, you will realize that it is not affinity that builds loyalty. It is shared war. There is an almost invisible moment when two people who barely know each other start to recognize each other as allies. It's not when they laugh together. It's not when they exchange compliments. That's when they discover they hate the same thing. Machiavelli observed this in the political game of Florence, but you can see it today in any office, in any meeting, in any corporate backroom. Two executives who would never look at each other become close when they realize that they both despise the same inefficiency, the same rival, the same structural mediocrity. Shared antipathy creates a stronger psychological glue than affinity, because it creates a narrative of survival us versus that which threatens our world. Have you ever experienced something like this? Perhaps in a company where everyone pretended to be happy, until, in a casual conversation, someone said an apparently innocent phrase. It's impressive how that sector always stops everything. You feel your body relax inside, as if you can finally breathe. It's not just agreement, it's relief. Suddenly you are no longer strangers, they are accomplices to a silent truth. Machiavelli would say that, at that moment, you didn't validate an opinion, you validated a fight. And the fight, when recognized, demands loyalty. Sociologists give this a name, but Machiavelli already practiced it: the construction of the internal group against the external group. You don't connect by saying I like you. You connect by saying I see the same dragon you see. The interesting thing is that the enemy doesn't have to be a person. It can be a system, a culture, a philosophy that suffocates. The effect is the same. When you name the obstacle that oppresses another, you position yourself not as a spectator, but as a companion in the trenches. And then comes something even deeper. By validating another's enemy, you also validate the heroic role he has built for himself. You're not just agreeing, you are reinforcing the internal narrative that keeps you standing. You're right, this needs to change. This simple phrase turns a complaint into a mission. Machiavelli knew that no one fights fervently for comfort, but everyone fights fervently for a story in which they see themselves as protagonists. But be careful. There is a difference between strategic outrage and empty negativity. The goal is not to complain, it is to create meaning. You come together not to mourn, but to mark moral territory. We are the few who still see. This sense of shared clarity creates an almost ritual bond. In just a few minutes, you feel like that person understands you in a way that no one else seems to understand. From then on, something unlikely happens: the relationship stops being transactional and becomes symbolic. You don't just meet to solve tasks, but to reaffirm a common vision. The enemy becomes a silent reference in every conversation, even when it is not mentioned. It's as if you share an invisible password that reorganizes the environment around you. And just when you think you understand the game, Machiavelli goes even deeper. He realized that behind shared hatred lies something more fragile and powerful: personal fantasy. Each person carries an idealized version of themselves that they rarely admit out loud. The tough manager wants to see himself as a generous mentor. The chaotic artist dreams of being recognized as a disciplined visionary. The insecure politician secretly wants to be remembered as a savior. These fantasies are not superficial vanities, they are ego survival mechanisms. If you identify this fantasy and position yourself as support, you don't just become an ally, you become a pillar. Imagine someone who keeps being told that they are cold and ruthless. One day, you say naturally you charge a lot, but you give everyone structure to grow. This phrase is not common praise. She rewrites his identity. You don't contradict it, you elevate it within the narrative itself. And then you start to occupy a specific role in that person's psychological theater. If she wants to be wise, you become the attentive student. If you want to be king, you become the loyal knight. If you want to be a rebel, you become the silent accomplice. It is not vulgar theater, it is a fine reading of the unconscious. Machiavelli would say that you are not feeding an illusion, you are supporting an internal system that keeps that person functional. The effects of this are surprising. Powerful people, accustomed to hostile environments, begin to relax in their presence. They don't need to defend themselves from you, because you don't threaten the story they tell about themselves. You become a neutral zone in a war territory. And neutral zones are rare. They are not invaded, they are protected. At this point, the relationship reaches an almost physiological level. You begin to act as an emotional regulator. Where there is tension, you bring calm. Where there is a rush, you impose rhythm. Where there is chaos, you deliver structure. Most people contribute to other people's stress by bringing more problems, more urgency, more noise. You do the opposite. You simplify. I understand the problem. Here is the solution. 3 sentences that are worth more than any resume. Studies show that top executives make decisions under levels of stress comparable to those of emergency surgeons. Their body lives on alert. When someone appears as a safe haven, the brain creates an immediate association. It's not rational, it's biochemical. You become remembered not for what you say, but for the feeling you leave behind. And the most unlikely often, they start looking for you not because of business, but because of silence. They enter your room like someone entering a secular temple, where no one demands, no one pressures, no one disputes. Machiavelli might have smiled to see how the absence of drama paradoxically becomes the most profound form of influence. You don't shout orders, you don't impose presence. You dissolve tensions. And dissolving tensions in a world driven by anxiety is an almost subversive act. People start to see you as someone who cleans the house from within, even without realizing it. But this power is still unstable if you don't master the next layer. So far, you have learned to create alliances, sustain fantasies, and regulate emotions. We need to understand how to move without a fixed form, how to be aggressive today and invisible tomorrow, how to lead without appearing to be a leader. Because, in the arena where the ego dictates the rules, rigidity is a sentence. And the form, when it crystallizes, becomes a target. You begin to understand that, after learning to create alliances, sustain fantasies, and regulate emotions, there is still a silent risk becoming predictable. Machiavelli never relied on rigid forms. For him, anyone who sticks to a single identity ends up offering the world a mold ready to be broken. That's why, when you enter environments of power, you start to act like water. Today he speaks little, tomorrow he leads. Today observe, tomorrow advance. There is no contradiction in this, there is survival. The rigidity is comfortable for those who observe, but it is lethal for those who play. You notice this when you start changing minute details. One day he appears in a suit in a casual environment. In the other, wear something simple in a formal place. Not to provoke, but to dissolve expectations. People can't fit you in anymore. And what doesn't fit is not easily attacked. Machiavelli would understand this movement as formlessness. When you don't have a fixed form, you can't be hit with precision. But adaptation is not enough. It just stops you from getting crushed. To stop being disposable, you need to become necessary. And this is the most uncomfortable transition of the entire journey. You begin to look at the systems around you not as someone who completes tasks, but as someone who reads gears. Where are the friction points? What doesn't anyone like to do? Which relationship is fragile but vital? Which process only works because no one dares to touch it? Maybe you discover that there is a client who only trusts you, or a report that only you truly understand, or an invisible ritual that keeps a project going. At first, you almost feel guilty about it. It feels wrong to be the only one to master something. But Machiavelli doesn't talk about selfishness, he talks about structural protection. If everything you do can be learned in 2 hours by anyone, you are a replaceable part. And parts are not negotiated, they are exchanged. Little by little, you begin to weave invisible threads. It doesn't teach everything. It doesn't document everything. It does not expose the entire method. Not out of fear, but out of strategy. You become the bridge between two areas that don't speak to each other. The person who translates the technical language for the decision maker. The one who holds a sensitive relationship that no one else knows how to sustain. And then something almost imperceptible happens. People stop asking if you're going to be there. They start to assume. This is where the tension arises. You realize you now have real power, but also real risk. Because whoever becomes necessary becomes observed. Small signs appear. An invitation to explain how you do something. An attempt to replace you with process. An innocent request to document everything. Machiavelli would say that here is the final test of your strategic maturity. You do not refuse, but give only the surface. It doesn't close doors, but it doesn't open safes. And as you protect your position, you begin to control something even more subtle: your options. Powerful people are overwhelmed by choices. Deciding is tiring. Most people think that helping means offering infinite possibilities. Machiavelli does the opposite. He teaches you how to write the menu. When you present just 2 or 3 paths, shaped so that one of them is clearly the safest, you are not taking away control of the other. You are organizing his reality. You've seen this happen. Someone comes up and asks, "What do you think I should do?" Before, you would respond cautiously, leaving everything open-ended. Now you say there are 3 paths. The first has this risk. The second resolves this. The third is the most solid. You don't impose. You structure. And the tired mind thanks you. The person feels like they decided alone, but you had already drawn the road. At that moment, something changes in the environment. You are no longer the executor. You are the invisible architect. Decisions pass through you before they become decisions. And this creates an unexpected effect. When something goes wrong, you are not to blame. When something goes right, you don't need to be applauded. The system begins to work around you, and no longer in spite of you. But there is a final layer of tension that builds when you reach this point. The dependency. People start to need you to maintain their peace of mind. The phone rings late. Messages appear out of turn. Not out of abuse, but out of habit. You have become part of their emotional mechanism. And then the question that Machiavelli would ask silently arises: how far are you willing to go to maintain this place? Because addiction, if not managed, becomes prison. You don't want to be a hostage to your own worth. You want to be indispensable by choice, not by exhaustion. This is where many fall. They try to support everything themselves. They become human bottlenecks. They get sick. Machiavelli would not celebrate this. He doesn't advocate martyrdom. He advocates leverage. You then learn to modulate your presence. Not always answering. Not solving everything. Leaving small voids that force the system to breathe without you, but not to function fully. Enough to let them know you are necessary, but not omnipresent. This fine dance between availability and absence is what keeps your position alive without consuming you. And as you perform this silent choreography, something approaches. A moment of internal confrontation. You realize that even with all this architecture, there is still a deadly weakness: the need for approval. If you still walk into a room expecting to be chosen, this whole edifice can collapse with a look of contempt. Machiavelli saves this revelation until the end because it hurts more than all the others. He knows that you can only go through the last door when you are willing to lose it. You feel it when, for the first time, you imagine leaving without resentment. When you realize that your identity is no longer tied to external recognition. When you understand that your position is strong precisely because you don't beg for it. This thought is scary because it dismantles years of conditioning. But it also frees. And it is at this point, exactly here, that the narrative compresses and expectations grow. You built alliances, sustained fantasies, regulated emotions, dissolved forms, created dependencies, wrote invisible menus. There is just one movement left for all of this to come together as a coherent system. A paradoxical movement, which Machiavelli considers the rarest of all, entering any room knowing that you can leave. No anger. Don't be afraid. No pleading. Because it's only when you no longer need to stay that, for the first time, you are truly invited to stay. You reach the end of this journey with a strange sensation, as if something inside you had been repositioned without any fuss. There is no euphoria. There is no promise of easy victory. There is silence. And in the silence, Machiavelli reappears as that presence that never screams, but never remains silent. He doesn't ask you to become someone cruel. He asks you to become awakened. Because the real danger is not using strategy, it is continuing to go through life as if strategy were something that only others master. Now that you've seen how the game works, the question is no longer how do I get accepted. The question is how do I move without asking for permission. This starts with small, everyday gestures. It starts when you stop responding to messages on impulse and start responding with intention. It starts when you enter a conversation to listen, not to explain. It starts when you observe more than you speak, and speak only when something really moves the environment. You don't need to go around applying formulas. The path is internal. It's learning to identify when your body wants to please and replacing that impulse with presence. It's realizing when your mouth opens to justify yourself and choose silence. It's feeling the anxiety of being forgotten and yet allowing your own absence. Machiavelli doesn't tell you to manipulate the world. He tells you to stop being manipulated by your own reflexes. In practice, this translates into something very simple and very difficult. You start treating yourself as someone of value before the world confirms it. You build your own agenda, even if it's small. You support your own decisions, even if no one applauds. You develop skills that don't scream status, but generate dependence. You learn to say no without aggression, to say yes without submission, and to leave without resentment. Maybe you notice that some relationships will cool down. People who only valued you while you were predictable will move away. This isn't loss, it's filtering. Others, unexpectedly, will come closer. Not because you changed your clothes or speech, but because you changed your axis. You stopped orbiting and started to have a center. Machiavelli would call this radical autonomy, the ability to remain whole even in the face of someone who can offer you everything. This is the most delicate moment of all, because it is not accompanied by fireworks. It comes with loneliness. A different loneliness, not one of abandonment, but of sovereignty. You start to feel like you no longer need to prove anything to get into environments. You enter because it makes sense, not because you want to be seen. And this energy, silent and dense, is immediately perceived by those who live surrounded by noise. If you want to apply all of this starting today, start small. Choose one conversation a week to talk less and observe more. Choose an invitation to decline gracefully. Choose a skill that no one wants to master and make it your territory. Choose a situation in which you would normally ask for help and turn it into a proposed solution. It's not about becoming someone else. It's about removing layers of need that were never yours. And when you make a mistake, because you will make a mistake, don't turn the mistake into guilt. Turn it into reading. The invisible game doesn't punish, it teaches. Every uncomfortable silence, every vague answer, every door that doesn't open is a map. Machiavelli doesn't ask you to always win. He asks you not to sleep while playing. Ultimately, it all comes down to this: you don't need permission to exist densely. You don't need to be chosen to position yourself. You don't need to beg to negotiate. When you start to act from fullness and not from lack, the world changes texture. The same people, the same places, the same systems start to react differently, as if you had moved an invisible field around them. Maybe you're thinking this sounds cold, but look honestly at your history. How many times has your kindness been used as a shortcut by someone who doesn't carry its weight? How many times has your competence become invisible because you never protected it? Machiavelli doesn't teach you to lose your soul. It teaches you not to leave it exposed. Now, before closing the cycle, I make a request that is not about the algorithm, it is about ritual. If something here resonates with you, enjoy this video as a sign to yourself that you're willing to get out of automatic mode. If you want, leave a comment, even if anonymous, even if it's just one word, to mark this moment as an internal turning point. And subscribe to the channel not as a gesture to me, but as a silent contract with your own lucidity. Because once you see the ropes, once you understand the theater, once you learn to move without begging, there is no comfortable return. There is only the daily choice to remain awake. And that choice is now yours.